Scott Pilgrim is an ugly 25-year-old freeloader who likes to live on the money of his sugar daddy. The only thing he is worried about is finding the girl of his dreams. However, to attain his dreams, he must first defeat 7 exes of the girl to finally start dating her for real. In a land full of snow, Scott finds himself exhausted and sweaty, which honestly doesn't make any sense. Still, he sees a cool pink-haired girl riding on wheels, telling him that he needs to wake up soon. Moments after, he wakes up in a bed with his best friend Wallace Wells, who is twinked just to give your imagination a breakdown. Naturally, Scott shares his dreams with him, but Wallace doesn't give a shit about his wet dreams. As a matter of fact, he only wants Scott to get out of his house and quit being a freeloader. Yet, Scott the ever-shameless brookie acts like he owns the place. In the thick, Scott heads to his friend's house, where Steven and Kim Pine play a band song. Trust me, you should be glad that you didn't hear the song. Yet, Knives Chow, who is also Scott's girlfriend, enjoys the song like Ed Sheeran is playing the guitar. Fun fact, Knives is only 17 years old, which definitely makes Scott a creep. She also thinks that they are the best band of all time, which everyone in the room doubts. After playing the whole afternoon, Scott and his friends hit the road to join a friend's house party. At the party, one of his friends ditches Scott from the get-go. With no other alternatives, Scott grabs a drink and scouts the party for potential nerdy encounters. To his utter shock, he finds the same girl from his dreams standing in the crowd. Using all the testosterone in his body, Scott walks up to her and starts talking about Sonic the Hedgehog trivia. To add icing to the cake, he asks whether she's real or not, which confuses the hell out of her. Knowing that this is his cue to leave, Scott goes and asks the host Julie about the new girl. As it turns out, she is Ramona Flowers, a girl who just moved to Toronto from New York because of a bad breakup. Right now, she got a job delivering DVDs for Netflix. Julie forbids him from approaching her. Back at home, Scott rents a movie from Netflix, hoping that Ramona will deliver it. Excited, he sits in front of the doorsteps for days without end. Finally, the day arrives when Ramona delivers the movie to him. After reviewing the credit card owner, she assumes that Scott is living in a sugar daddy scenario, which might be accurate. Nonetheless, Scott reconfirms if Ramona is the girl in his dreams. Unexpectedly, she gives a sci-fi answer, explaining that there is a subspace in his brain, although he takes everything as a joke and asks her on a date. In the evening, the two of them take a stroll in the park where they start talking about their respective pasts. However, Ramona believes that bringing up the past is unnecessary, and so they talk about Trump running in the elections. Following this, a sudden snowstorm hits the town, forcing Ramona to reveal her subspace abilities, which allows her to travel through dimensions. Due to the heavy storm, Ramona invites him to stay for a few hours and enjoy some hot tea with her. Luckily, the storm doesn't settle for quite a while, and the few hours turn into the entire night. Mistakenly, Scott walks onto Ramona as she is changing her clothes. However, the situation works in his favor because our cherry boy finally gets a kiss from a girl. After a few moments, Ramona makes it pretty clear that she is not into hookup culture. Still, Scott can sleep in her bed because the storm isn't setting anytime soon. On the other hand, Gideon Graves, the leader of the League of Evil Exes, reports to Ramona's first ex, Matthew Patel, that she is sleeping with a new boy. Ultimately, he decides to defeat Scott because he is undeserving of Ramona. As the night passes, she fanatically changes her mind and turns things into Scott's favor. The following morning, Scott makes sure that his encounter with Ramona will be something more than a one-night stand. Before leaving the house, he invites her to the band concert that will be held at night. Afterwards, he returns back home to share the good news with his sugar daddy. Instantly, he tells him to end his fake relationship with Knives because apparently she believes that Scott is her boyfriend. Later that night, Scott makes sure that he hides from both the girls to avoid any hard feelings. However, the girls manage to meet in the crowd, telling each other that they are seeing someone in the band. Luckily, Kim starts hitting the drums before anything important is spilled. As everyone starts enjoying the show, Knives manage to faint from excitement. Right after, Matthew crashes the party by flying into the concert hall. Much to everyone's surprise, Scott manages to block his first attack from the get-go. In that moment, Ramona confesses that Matthew is his first ex from back in middle school. Although their relationship didn't even pass the 2-week benchmark, which means that she barely knows her. With that backstory out of the way, Matthew and Scott officially start fighting. Unexpectedly, Matthew manages to land a powerful hit using his mystical powers, which makes him disappear into thin air. After winning the match, Matthew does his victory stance with the help of Ramona. Apparently, the rules of the league suggest that Matthew can get back together with her because he has defeated Scott. Yet Ramona and everyone else don't pay any heed to his rants, and instead they leave the concert hall without even sharing the footage of the fight. Simultaneously, Knives regain consciousness only to learn from the janitor that Scott was punched to death, which freaks her out. The following morning, Ramona changes her hair color to dark blue and goes to Scott's funeral. There, she finds all of Scott's friends and relatives mourning his sudden death. Most of all, Steven, Kim, and the nameless nerd are in shock, as they still can't believe he's gone. Moments after, Knives enters the church and begins accusing Ramona for being Scott's killer. Despite the unfair accusation, Ramona stays calm and listens to every single word without any lash out. Just as we and the others thought that things can be more dramatic, Envy Adams, who is apparently Scott's ex and the lead singer in the Knives' favorite band, Clash of Demon, enters the church. Instantly, Knives switch sides along with her attitude, saying that Envy is her favorite lead singer. With lots of flashes in the background, she walks up to the casket in order to tribute a song to him. Suddenly, the whole crowd forgets about the pathetic loser who just died, as they start enjoying their private little concert. On the other hand, all of Ramona's exes receive an invitation to their secret lair by a mysterious someone. Back in the church, after Envy lands every note in her performance, all of the people present forget that someone just got wasted and follow Envy outside the church like the fudging paparazzi. However, Ramona walks up to his casket in a state of sadness. Meanwhile, in America, ex-number 2 Hollywood legend Locust Lee enters the secret league lair only to find the ex-number 3 vegan rock star Todd Ingram waiting in line for the show to begin. At the table, everyone assumes that Gideon was the one who invited them to their lair, but as a matter of fact, even he is unaware of the situation. In the instance, Matthew shows his dark face, revealing that he's the one who invited everyone. He announces that Ramona's new boyfriend was killed by him in Mortal Kombat. Yet, he did not gain a single thing in return except embarrassment. As a matter of fact, he intends to challenge the leadership of Gideon, as he's nothing but a useless nerd who hasn't helped them at all. To add fuel to the fire, Gideon emphasizes that he will get back together with Ramona, which means all of them will gain nothing out of it. This statement of his turns the entire league against him, allowing Matthew to challenge him in a one-on-one fight. Immediately, Gideon begins praising his empire, saying that he is the Bruce Wayne of this world, whereas Matthew is a D-grade student with nothing. Following this, all of the other exes begin questioning if Video even has the balls to fight for his ideals. Just like a rat, Gideon is trapped into accepting the fight, with everything on the line. As official witnesses to the fight, the rest of the exes move to the sidelines while the 2 participants take the center. First and foremost, Matthew and Gideon start the battle with some old-fashioned hand-to-hand combat. After matching fist for fist, Gideon manages to land a first hit and draw first blood. Following this, Matthew summons a group of magical girls with insane firepower. This is something that forces Gideon to switch to defense, but unfortunately even that isn't enough to stop the heat. Eventually, he takes the battle more seriously and takes up arms to slice the magical girls. For a while, the 2 of them duke it out with each other in a neck-and-neck fight. However, after some time, Gideon takes the upper hand by killing all the magic girls and driving him into a corner. In the lowest moment, Matthew unleashes his most powerful magic technique, which drastically changes the tide of battle. He forces him to change the location of the battle to his advantage. On the rooftop, Matthew knocks him off the edge of the building and wins the fight. Before pulling him upwards, Gideon Butler forces him to sign the legal documents transferring the ownership of the Empire over to Matthews. Even the rest of the Exes are happy with the new change of leadership with the League. Meanwhile, back in Toronto, Ramona returns to her house and recalls all the good time she spent with Scott. After laying in the bed, she unintentionally finds herself in the same subspace where she hears a distant voice crying out to her. Meanwhile, the nameless nerd shuns himself inside his room in order to write a book about something that has a rainbow, which would get picked up by Disney. Yet, even after being inspired by Scott's sudden death, little nerdy can't overcome his writer's block. Naturally, he sleeps only to discover that he is a sleep writer, which doesn't make any sense. The following morning, Ramona changes her hair color once again, making people wonder why she hasn't gone bald yet. Nonetheless, she makes her way to Julie's French-themed cafe where she claims that someone kidnapped Scott and faked his death. Instantly, Julie takes her 15-minute break to hear about the whole story. Apparently, last night she somehow entered Scott's subspace and heard a distant cry. Following this incident, she watched the CCTV footage from the other day, only to discover that Scott was pulled into a portal right before Matthew struck him. Despite all the details, Julie can't wrap her head around the fact that Ramona wants to save his bum after just one date. Still, Ramona insists on her to work her magic and reveal all the suspects in her mind. With no choice left, she takes a 15-minute break from the fan service gig to narrow down a list of all suspects. First of all, she eliminates her ex Steven from the list because his anxiety-filled bum can't even manage to jack off without overthinking it. She also eliminates the nameless nerd from the list because his stupidity could even make Scott look like a genius. As for his exes, Julie reveals that envy crushed his heart under her leather strap boots, and that was way before she became a sex symbol of the country. Although, talking to his other ex might get her somewhere. Simultaneously, back in Steven's apartment, Kim and the others miss Scott for her bass-playing talents. Unexpectedly, Knives takes the show by playing a powerful bass alongside Kim for 4 hours straight. After that, she runs off to work at the movie rental store where she encounters Ramona. As a matter of fact, Kim had assumed that Scott faked his own death to avoid paying his dues at their store. In that instance, Ramona confirms that the first half of her hypothesis is correct. Apparently, Kim also understands that she has been using Scott's subspace to deliver DVDs for Netflix, which is how they put Blockbuster out of his business. As their conversation continues, Kim mentions that Scott has been a stupid fudge from the beginning. He always tried to impress her by drawing sheeps that didn't even look like them. Despite all this, he somehow managed to become her first real boyfriend. He even saved her from an entire army of students at another school because of her, which counts as their most romantic movies. When these stories of the past come to an end, Kim concludes that Ramona is in love with him. Still, she thinks Ramona should start the investigation with one of the evil exes. In the meantime, someone smashes on the bells at the front desk, which forces Kim to abandon their conversation. Unexpectedly, the new visitor is none other than ex number 4 Roxy, who is also Ramona's college roommate. As the two begin discussing the past, Ramona mentions that Roxy has always been bad at sharing her emotions. In order to share her true feelings, she begins to attack her with a sword instead of using words. This forces Ramona to take out the sledgehammer of Thor from her magic purse. As the fight escalates, the two of them find themselves in different movies in the store. In the midst of the fight, they get transported into a plane where Ramona apologizes for leaving her. As a matter of fact, she couldn't face her after what she had done. However, all Roxy ever wanted was to see her and nothing else. Ultimately, she accepts her apology, but this doesn't mean that the fight is over. The moment Roxy resumes the attack, an unknown force starts firing at the plane, and this causes them to fall out. With great struggle, Ramona manages to hold her hand and escape the subspace of the movie. After the exhausting battle, Roxy tries to shoot her arrows as she asks if they can kiss. However, Ramona refuses the idea because she is now in love with Scott, although they can be good friends from now on. Once again, Roxy tries to become her friend with benefits, but Mila Kunis ain't having it in this one. In the heat of the moment, Kim comes closer and kisses Roxy right on the money, but they don't feel that spark getting wet down there. In the end, she leaves the place hoping to rizz up Julie as her next target. Meanwhile, in the dead of night, Video, also known as G-Man, visits Julie's house. He reminds her that once upon a time before all the money, Julie knew him by another name. Immediately, Julie remembers that he is Gordon, who was also known as Fearless back in the day. As their conversation progresses, Gideon reveals that he has lost his empire and his worth. All of his billionaire and millionaire friends have shunned. He can't even get a reservation at McDonald's. Ultimately, Julie invites him to come inside her house and maybe come inside her if lucky. One morning in California, Lucas Lee wakes up in Super Mansion ready to tackle the day ahead. For some assistance, he grabs a skateboard and rides out it outside the everywhere he possibly can. This causes riots and traffic jams in the street of the city, which in turn causes damage to his reputation as a whole. Naturally, Luca's agent calls to warn him about his Hollywood bad boy attitude. She also forces him to sign a movie in Toronto, because this will be his only one for a while. After the call ends, Lucas just resumes his shenanigans along with his catchphrase, whatever. Simultaneously, back in Toronto, Ramona begins her day with a new hair dye. Afterwards, she goes to the new movie set where Lucas is playing the main lead. Quietly, she sneaks in from the front door, only to find the nameless nerd Neil sitting on the set, which looks exactly like the concert hall from the other day. As it turns out, Neil is the writer of a Lucas Lee movie, which rightfully shocks her. Right after another bombshell falls, as Envy Adams enters the set in the same outfit as her. Out of nowhere, the director tells everyone to shut the fudge up and calls action. Unexpectedly, all the characters that were in Scott's life are casted in the movie. This makes her realize that Lucas will be playing Scott Pilgrim. Ultimately, she asks Neil to take her to Lucas' trailer. At the destination, she overhears a clapping sound coming from inside the trailer. Yet, she ignores the obvious signals and knocks anyway. Although her high school sweetheart doesn't talk to her much because he must go to the set. After returning to the set, Ramona finds Wallace on the set, and he is eager to see an actor play him in the movie. A few moments later, Lucas begins his first bedroom scene with a cheap version of Wallace. In the middle of the scene, Wallace displays twink rainbow confidence and highlights the director's mistake in hiring such a loser. This earns him a job in the movie instead of the loser who just gets thrown out by somebody. Later that afternoon, Ramona visits his trailer once again in order to ask about Scott's sudden disappearance. However, she knows that he's most likely clapping a girl inside. Unexpectedly, for the first time in his life, Lucas actually focuses on reading the script. Still, he thinks that the ending of the script is unrealistic because Ramona is an only fangirl who can't settle with a single dude. As their conversation progresses, she explains that someone fagged Scott's teeth and kidnapped him. Naturally, Lucas is her main suspects, because he voluntarily joined the Ligue of Evil Exes. Yet for some reason, he emphasizes that none of them in the League are actually evil. Plus, Ramona is looking for a guy who is dating a 17-year high schooler, which would make him more evil than them. In that very moment, the news reporter narrates that Lucas is dating someone on the set who's playing the role of a 17-year-old high schooler. Instantly, he clears matters with Ramona, revealing that the girl is 31 years old in real life. Out of nowhere, a bunch of paparazzi infiltrate the van, aiming to get a scoop of gossip. With no alternative left, Lucas is forced to fight with the army of paparazzis with nothing but a skateboard. For the first few moments, he does fine on his own, but then a group of them launch a powerful attack on him. Instantly, Ramona follows him there in order to lend helping hand. Inside the room, Lucas recalls that she used to always help her out no matter the situation, but then she left him with a broken heart and broken board. On that day, he had decided to become the best skateboarder in the world, along with the best actor. Just like in high school, Ramona comes to his rescue and hides him in the magic bag. This allows him to easily escape the site without any complication. Although, Lucas loses the role in the movie along with his agent, meaning that his career is toast. After parting ways, Ramona notices Todd coming out of a portal similar to what appeared on that day. Meanwhile, along with the movie, the production team decides to document the entire filmmaking process and behind-the-scenes delights. The cameraman begins with the lovebirds of the rock world, Todd and Envy, who are playing Scott and Ramona. As it turns out, they think that being famous enough can land you into any movie role, which isn't a far-fetched idea, especially since the Amber incident. Neil and the director also take part in this adventure, although most of their ideas are conflicting, so let's not tell them. Right after, the real Ramona enters the scene, revealing that she's the new stunt double for the fake Ramona, which confuses even the staff members. Actually, she only took the job because the security guards were on her back. Thus, they were beginning to become a hindrance in her investigation of Todd. Day by day, she tries to speak with Todd, but his current girlfriend forces her to quit yapping like an old hag. Right after, Wallace takes his rightful place on the hot seat, revealing that he wants to get paid for being Wallace, rather than doing it for free. Eventually, the shooting of the movie begins with the three main characters in one shot. The director instructs Todd to lightly hold Ramona in his arms. However, the two of them start a hub video shooting without any thoughts of the surroundings. After a few hundred retakes, the director gets climax and calls it a day. Yet, Wallace suggests that they should go through with his plan to avoid the problem. In the next retake, he diverts Todd's attention towards himself and shares a long moment with him. From that day onward, the two of them begin reviewing their lines in the trailer, which for some reason makes the truck go up and down. Do you guys know why that happens? I am a bit confused. In another interview, Envy reveals that Todd and she have always been in an open relationship. However, in the end, they always come back to each other without fail. Ramona carries this conversation, explaining that Todd and she sometimes hooked up in the school backyard. He also teleported to the moon and punched a hole in it, which seems very romantic to Envy, but Ramona thinks that it was horrific. Afterwards, she tries to talk with Todd about the Scott incident. Yet, once again, Wallace interrupts their conversation for their usual line reviewing session. Tired as hell, Ramona reports this issue in the documentary, suggesting that they should stay apart. Although the opposite happens, as the two of them get closer to each other than ever. Todd even goes as far to come out of the closet and confess his love in front of the camera. Naturally, Envy loses her cool and storms out of the studio set. Pissed off, she goes to Wallace, demanding that he should fix the situation. At this point, he already knows that Todd is in love with him, but unfortunately, he reveals that their relationship is a fling on the set. This sudden heartbreak hangs every system in his body and makes him go nuts. Right after, Envy kicks the hell out of him for breaking her boyfriend. To counter this advance, Wallace summons his 4 stunt doubles, shocking her mainly because she was only allowed 1. Taking advantage of the moment, Wallace explains the sheer importance of having a good lawyer by your side. Still, Envy is confident that her stunt double can easily overpower them, otherwise her bum will be fired. Without any alternative, Ramona fights hard and gains the upper hand against every one of them. In the midst of things, Wallace begins verbally abusing his doubles to such an extent that they start crying. I guess they can't handle top grants. After taking the win, the two girls visit Todd's personal jumping trailer, only to find the vegan dude eating meat. One by one, he gives them a tour of all the places they clapped in numerical order. With that unwanted information out of the way, Ramona plays a video of Scott's abduction in front of them. Upon watching it carefully, Envy evidently states that the portals are much more refined and accurate. According to her, this is something that Todd can't complete even in 100 years. Later in the evening, Matthew arrives at the studio in his cheap Lego helicopter to fire everyone on the scene. Apparently, he hates the way the story goes with Scott winning the fight against him and all, especially since Matthew is the one who managed to kill him. At that time, she reveals that truth about the entire situation. As the conversation progresses, Matthew goes on to reveal that he won everything that Gideon owned in the world. Furthermore, now he is staying with someone named Julie Powers. Immediately, she leaves the site to ask Julie and Gideon some questions. In the meantime, Knives takes the chance to talk with Matthew and Mangoes to get his personal card for future deals. After losing everything, Lucas calls the former billionaire Gideon to find some closure in losing, because Four Eyes is an expert. Apparently, Lucas wants Gordon to forgive him for his behavior the other day at the Lyre. However, Gordon mentions that the door for forgiveness is long closed, although they can start a new chapter as good friends. A while later, Lucas drops by Julie's house to have some fun with him. Together, the two of them literally change the whole fudging architecture of the entire house by building skate ramps and whatnot. After a few 90 minutes, Julie returns with Ramona, only to find the house in shambles. She yells at both of them just like my mom yells at me. A few hours earlier, Ramona begins her day by changing her hair color before anything else. Afterwards, she drops by Julie's house to investigate Scott's kidnapping. Unexpectedly, she learns that Julie has started dating Gordon. On the other hand, back at Stephen's house, Knives masterfully plays the piano in her first try. Apparently, she convinced Matthew to open a Broadway musical theater in which he will perform on his own. With all the recent events, Stephen and the others attempt to cheer Neil from his recent loss. Surprisingly, in that instance, he reveals that the screenplay wasn't written by him. He just found it sitting in front of his computer in the morning. Curious, the team investigates the matter only to find a key detail about Scott's whereabouts. Simultaneously at the cafe, Ramona shares her suspicion on both Julie and Gordon. However, she assures her that they are not involved in his disappearance. As a matter of fact, he was the ugliest nerd in her high school. Despite this, he was always used to wearing those no-fear t-shirts, which earned him the name Fearless. Ultimately, he asked the most popular girl in their school out on a date with a 12-point business memo to why she should date. Naturally, the girl rejected him in the most brutal of ways, which forced him to skip town. Despite the situation, Julie wishes that Gordon would turn back into his old ways and display great ambition. Unfortunately, nowadays he is just a sore loser who spends most of his time watching anime and playing games. Upon returning back, they find out that the two boys have turned Julie's house into a mess. To add icing to the cake, Lucas expresses his intentions to crash at her house for a while. This revelation sparks a Mortal Kombat fight to the dead. Fortunately, Romania comes in their way and forces them to act as adults. Afterwards, she makes it pretty clear that Lucas needs to leave the house. Out of nowhere, a robot breaks the nearest windows and breaks out. Instantly, she recognizes it from somewhere recent. Ultimately, she leaves the house to advance her investigation. Outside of her apartment, she finds Knives, and the rest of the band gathered to reveal some groundbreaking discovery. However, at this point, Ramona has already figured out that the culprit behind the incident were the twins. As it turns out, Ramona screwed them over back in college by dating the two of them simultaneously. The two genius twins created a vegan power robot which could masterfully trap Scott unlike anything else. She even has footage of the entire thing in order to prove the hypothesis. Now, all that is left for her is to find the location of the twins, and in doing so, they will find Scott. Out of nowhere, Scott shows up at the doorstep and rings the doorbell. He confirms that the twins were behind him disappearing, although the mastermind of the whole situation was none other than Scott himself. On the day of him disappearing, Scott somehow found himself in the fabric of time and space along with a mysterious person. Naturally, he was confused about everything, and he used force to find the answers. Unexpectedly, he found himself in the future version of Toronto, Canada, alongside an older version of himself. Obviously, he becomes curious about his future and whether he did all right for himself. After taking the local transport, they arrive at an insane mansion owned by none other than old Scott himself. Despite enjoying all the technological advancements, young Scott wants to know the reason that old Scott brought him the future. especially since he was going to fight some dude in the cocky league or something. Instantly, old Scott corrects his pronunciation, revealing that it was the League of Evil Exes that is after him, although he thinks that fighting the League of Exes was the biggest mistake of their life. To provide context and some backstory or future story, old Scott takes younger Scott to the virtual reality room where he learns that Ramona got married to her. However, years after their marriage, the two of them were forced to separate from another. Still, he covers up the reason behind the situation by talking about their new band. Apparently, in the future, old Scott and the twins have become close friends with each other. As time passed by, the three of them began creating the music for the world to enjoy. In the garage, young Scott notices that the place is filled with Wallace's old stuff. This makes him realize that they are still freeloaders even in the future. Right after, Wallace enters the garage and is delighted to see that the two Wallaces close with each other. Later at the bar, Wallace reveals that he's in a sugar daddy relationship with someone. Surprisingly, someone is working for Nintendo, the top G of games in the old era. As the conversation progresses, old Scott blames old Wallace for giving him the idea to bring back young Scott from the past. Although, Wallace just meant it as a joke and nothing else. He just normally asked the two twin brothers to build him a machine that would work. At this point, young Scott has realized that old Scott brought him to this place so that he can avoid confronting all the exes. In doing so, he will not be able to date Ramona, who will eventually break his heart. Upon hearing this, young Scott suggests that he will avoid the mistake that his future version made. Yet, this only puts old Scott on the defense and leaves the room. Right after, Wallace reveals that the pain is like he has experienced nothing ever experienced. Later in the evening, on the rooftop, young Scott discovers that the little robot can record everything that comes in contact with him. This allows him to watch the events of the past using the new functions of AI. The same night, Wallace takes young Scott over to old Ramona's house. In reality, she was the one who delivered the movie script to young Neil, which was originally written by him in a book. As a matter of fact, old Ramona can break through the time barrier, allowing Scott to return home without fear. Before making the trip back, old Ramona decides to spend some time with the younger generation. Afterwards, Scott apologizes to her for ghosting like a girl. Ghosts you. In the heat of the moment, the two of them lean in closer to kiss. However, for some reason, they are met with a supernatural anti-kiss barrier that might have been set up by one of the exes. After a while, they conclude that Scott must fight with all of her access for the curse to lift upon him. Luckily, all of them will be gathering at the new Matthew show. On the day of the show, Scott challenges Todd to Mortal Kombat, but for some reason, he is more interested in butter-coated popcorn and Wallace's protein. Following this, none of the other exes even show any sign of accepting his fighting challenge, nor do they have any knowledge about the force field barrier between them. Before the show begins, Lucas congratulates Scott for getting the girl without any major achievements in life. Still, he and everyone else want him to kiss in public to ensure their love is bound forever. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge explosion approaches Scott and the others, transporting them onto a moon-like area. As it turns out, the culprit behind all this is another older Scott who has been training for this day. He thinks that destroying them all is the only way to ensure that he will stay single forever. Without wasting any more breath, Scott begins his fight of different ideologies in front of everyone. After a while, all the exes present at the scene equip themselves with weapons and continue to fight. However, even all of their combined attacks failed to land a powerful hit on his body. In the end, both Ramona and Scott take the first line of defense in order to defeat the beast. Unfortunately, even after a barrage of attacks, none of their energy could even come close to old Scott. Just as all hope seems lost, old Ramona arrives on the scene using her time-traveling abilities. She asks whether they should have separated from each other for 10 years over something trivial, although, according to old Scott, he was just trying to give him the space she asked for. Still, by this point, old Ramona announces that young Ramona should give up and live her life. At exactly that moment, old Scott accuses her of always running away. This reminds young Ramona that she has indeed run away from every little fling she has. Despite the warning, young Ramona says that she won't run away any longer. Instead, she will accept the fact that relationships need to work on both ends. Mysteriously, both Ramona and the older version join focus like Sonic the Hedgehog. First of all, they send old Scott back to his timeline in order to avoid any more mishaps. With that over, she destroys the barrier between them and kisses Scott without a care in the world. In the end, everyone returns to the show, where the magical girls disarm all the bombs that Gordon planted. Strangely, instead of getting angry, Gordon starts crying because he wants his empire back. And, in exchange, the only thing Matthew asks is to keep his show. Following this event, everyone one Ramona Exes begins a new chapter in their life, doing something that they can all be proud of. Even Wallace is roaming around the French with all the money he got from the unfinished movie. Meanwhile, Scott and Ramona enjoy their life happily ever after. At this point, I am eager to hear stories about your encounters with strange exes, and also leave a sub to avoid any future encounters with such an evil league of exes.